my pleasure to be here today with Jos Delbeke, who is the climate chair at the European Investment Bank. Thank you so much for taking the time to talk to me today.
My pleasure. Yeah.
So when I was thinking of how to describe your history in working for climate, it's even hard to know. You probably need a couple of hours to say what have you done. From EU's implementation of Kyoto Protocol, you're part of Paris Agreement, you were involved in setting up the EU's climate and energy targets for 2020 and 2030, and the list can just go on and on and on. And now the targets are set.
Yeah.
How do we reach them?
Well, that's a good question. What I have done is that we spend a lot of time and effort on preparation. So good analysis is what matters. I'm an economist, so and my strong belief is you do not set targets somewhere in the blue, even if there is one or the other scientist saying we should do this, we should do that. No, you have to calculate through, is it feasible? Is it possible to reach the targets? And through economic modeling, connected with technology models, etc., you get a feel on what you have to do on renewable energy, on energy efficiency, on transport, on buildings, on industry, etc. So we spend a lot of time and effort in the Commission. We had building up a team of some 20 people, top people, to calculate through this overall targets for Europe, but also what the impact is going to be on each and every single member state. Because we have 27 member states, the politics in every single member state is different. Because the energy mix is different. If you go to a country like Sweden with a lot of hydro and a lot of nuclear, that's very different from a country like Poland where there is a lot of coal still being used, or Bulgaria or Romania. Or you go to a southern country like Spain or Portugal where they have again a completely different reality. So having a good preparation about what the possible impact is going to be, what you have to do, what the impact is going to be, and then derive from that the targets that should be put on the table of politicians. Of course, we do not prescribe what should be there, but we give options to the politicians. We say option A, option B, option C. It's for you in the democratic debate to decide, but developing reachable and pragmatic options, that's what is the core of the entire exercise. So that's what we have been doing for the Paris Agreement, but also, in the past on the Kyoto Protocol. And that is how we could build up a European climate policy that was hanging together, despite the very different realities in the field of energy, transport, or generally industrialization and the role of industry in the economics of every single member state.
How far away are we actually on reaching those targets now that they are set?
Well, we are halfway, to put it in a shortcut. We have the Green Deal, and the Green Deal that the European Union adopted said that we would have a target of 55% reduction of our emissions compared to 1990. Today, we are at around 25%. So you could say we are halfway. Of course, we know the easy stuff may have been done first. So the more complicated stuff is just waiting for us. And we only have 8 years in front of us. So the journey will have to be intensified. And I think and the policies will have to become much more proactive. And the current crisis in Ukraine is not facilitating things in the short term, but in the medium term, it could help us because energy is expensive. So saving energy is a very rational objective for at least individuals. If we have to close down companies, that's not the way we want to go. We would like to keep our jobs and keep our economic activity and at the same time reduce emissions. So as a shortcut, yes, we can do it. If we implement all our policies that we have been starting in the past, sometimes a bit hesitant, but if we are more proactive in using all the policies we have been adopting, we can reach the targets.
You talk quite a bit about individuals and households and what we as private people can do, but how about the industries?
Well, I think that industry has a major challenge because we have a lot of older installations that are very polluting, that are emitting a lot of carbon. And we have that in particular in the cement, in the steel sector, some of the chemical installations in the non-ferrous, it's very intensive in terms of energy use, and hence mostly it is also carbon intensive. So we have a real challenge at hand, and there is a raft of new technologies coming. And the real question is, are we going to invest in those new technologies? Which technologies are we talking about? There is no brainer now to invest massively in renewable energy, in solar panels, windmills, offshore, onshore, storage of electricity, the digitalization, more networks. That's a non-brainer. We should do much more in that space. But then there is also the new technologies emerging. We talk a lot about hydrogen. To produce it ourselves or others may produce it. There are countries in Africa who have much more sun, and with cheap solar energy, they could produce green hydrogen at attractive prices. So that is a question. We are also having carbon capture and storage for a sector like cement. That's very important, or some applications in the chemical sector. But these are new technologies, and new technologies in the beginning are always expensive. After a while, the cost of the technologies comes down. So there is hope to invest in these new technologies, but you have to get moving. Our industry cannot sit on the fence and be in a dubious, attitude. Shall we invest? Shall we not invest? I think it's the moment to jump and to invest in those new technologies and roll them out in the economy. And as we're rolling them out, the cost will go down. We have seen it on solar panels. It was extremely expensive 15 years ago. Today is the cheapest way of producing electricity. With windmills, we are in the same. Electric vehicles, batteries, we are in the same space. So I think investing in it gives us the tools to learn the technology and to make it cheaper. I would hope that the oil and gas companies who make super profits are going to invest these super profits exactly in those sectors we are talking about: renewables, about infrastructure, about green hydrogen. So that would be very welcome. They are having, quite a number of extra profits that they are earning from the current situation on energy markets. On the other sectors, such as steel, chemicals, non-ferrous, I think we need a lot of support from the government. The carbon market can be a tremendous support. The prices we are currently having help those companies to look into those options, but they need an additional push because the carbon market on its own cannot do it. They have to have other additional, elements that could make the balance in favor of investing in these technologies more favorable. And I see it happening. I see low carbon steel emerging on the market. I see low carbon cement. I see in the chemical sector, many, encouraging technologies based on biochemicals, etc. So a lot is going on. So I would hope that we can accelerate that.
To understand the effort of putting this all together, are the legislations already in place in different countries?
There were, but we were early in the game as the EU. So there were some forerunners. Germany was doing something, the UK, who still was a member, was doing something, the Danes and the Scandinavians were doing something. But generally, this was the first tryout of policy measures. And so at the EU level, we could immediately set the scene about how we have to move together. Because when you are in the international negotiations, Kyoto Protocol, Paris Agreement, it's only the EU that matters. Every single member state is a small member state. And so when you can act together as the EU, you have more influence into the debate. And that was a little bit the secret, having common targets that we are confident we can reach them. It gives us leverage at the international level.
And what role does carbon policy play?
Well, a very important role in Europe. I am an economist, so carbon pricing is a very important instrument, something that is free, nobody pays attention to. So to motivate all individuals and all companies to look at their carbon emissions require the price. Now, we tried in Europe first to go for a carbon tax. For a decade, we were looking for taxation, and we did not succeed because taxes is a very national domain, and the politics around taxes is always complicated in every single member state. So we changed tack from taxes, setting the price of carbon, to emissions trading, where you set the allowed quantity of pollution. And that falls under the environment chapter of the Treaty of Rome. And through that switch, we could decide with qualified majority. And in Europe, that's perhaps for the listener a theoretical notion, qualified majority. But for the policymaker, that makes a hell of a difference. In taxation, you have to decide with unanimity, while qualified majority is a majority. And so that facilitated greatly to have common targets and to put a system like the ETS, the emissions trading system, in place, because we could decide with qualified majority. We had not to wait for all member states to come together in a unanimous decision. That was a big difference.
And how do you see the carbon prices, let's say, per ton of CO2 developing in the upcoming 5 years?
Well, difficult to say in the current crisis. We have a crisis on the energy markets. We have a war. Now, the shortcut is that, of course, the availability of cheap Russian gas facilitated climate policy a lot, because we were able to move away from coal towards natural gas, in particular in electricity generation. And the carbon market was doing that. So we have now a little, pause in the carbon market for several reasons. Upheaval in energy markets, as I just explained, but also the targets that are there driving the market upward. But the war in Ukraine is possibly causing a bit of a recession, or at least less economic activity. So I think, but who am I to make a speculation? I think that we are going to stay for a couple of years with the price level that we currently have been seeing. That means between 70 and 90 euros per ton of CO2. There is going to be a bit fluctuation according to what is happening in energy markets, how the economic outlook is. So I think we are going to be in that price range. At least I would hope, for two reasons. First, for economic operators, it's good that they know what the price is going to be, more or less. That's one thing. And the other thing, if prices would go much higher, then we would see some political reaction to it. We already heard that some member states, Poland, Spain, where the energy market, nervosity has been very outspoken. They said, well, are these prices not too high? So camping for a couple of years around the price level we have, nobody can predict exactly what the price level is going to be, but around that price is driving future investments in low carbon technology, which is good, and is preventing at the same time that some countries, are getting very nervous that the carbon price may be too high.
So now we talked a little bit about the EU side, let's say the regulated markets. How about the voluntary carbon market? How do you feel, how much should it be regulated, or should it not be regulated at all and continue growing in the way it is structured right now?
Well, I think that the voluntary carbon market has a major challenge in front of itself, and that is the quality of the offsets. And it's up to the voluntary carbon market operators to see whether they will be able to improve the quality of the offsets, or whether they will need some kind of light regulation. The jury is out. I'm an observer. I was very present at the compliance markets. I'm observing with a lot of interest what is happening in the voluntary carbon market, but there is one thing clear, that the quality, the checking on whether these carbon offsets really represent emission reductions and good solutions for the climate, that is really of capital importance.
So EU ETS no longer accepts offsets. What is the reason behind that?
Well, the EU was very open originally. When the ETS was created, we were in the process of ratifying the Kyoto Protocol. And in the Kyoto Protocol, offsets were created, the clean development mechanism. And we were very committed to take those offsets of the clean development mechanism on board as part of our ETS. But we were making some provisos. We were putting a quantity target. We should not go beyond the 1.5, 1.6 million of credits. We also were putting in some quality reassurances, no nuclear, no forestation, no hydropower, etc. But for the rest, we were very open. Now, we saw how it developed. The quality checks on the credits created under the Clean Development Mechanism was weak and went weaker by the day. Mm-hmm. And so we saw the scenario unfolding that people could create these offsets for a ridiculously low price, perhaps 1 or 2 euros per ton, and they could sell them on our carbon market for perhaps 20, 25 euros. So that was a quite considerable profit rate. And so we got a backlash where people were saying that was not what was meant. We need better quality assurance, better control over what we are importing and paying for. And that was not coming. And when we reached that quantity target, on top of that, the EU decided to close its access of these offsets to the EU ETS. Now that's Europe. It took a long time before we closed the door. And it is also always requiring a long time before we may reopening the door. And that's where we are today. We can only have a new debate on allowing offsets in Europe and in particular under the ETS if much higher quality of the offsets are going to be created under the voluntary carbon market.
But do you think there is a possibility for these debates?
There is definitely a possibility, and the jury is out. What are the two major possibilities? We see the Integrity Council on the VCM coming forward with very good ideas. Are they going to succeed in setting a quality standard? Like I read between the lines, the intention is. So that is where the jury is out, whether they will succeed, yes or no. There is also a debate in the United Nations on Article 6. And Article 6, as it is United Nations, call on action on the parties. And the parties are the nations, are the states. So are the states going to start regulating, the offsets? That's also a possibility. So the ICVCM is rather global in orientation, a global market that could perhaps structure itself around improved quality. If that is not going to happen, I see that national authorities are going to start regulating, not so much in Europe, because we closed, for a while, at least the door on offsets, but in many other countries where people are going to require much more quality in exchange for the carbon price that they are paying.
And if the quality is improved and the price, let's say the carbon price still stays more or less stable, how do you think the VCM markets will develop, let's say until 2030?
If there is more quality, they will grow. They will gain in importance. There is a lot of interest, positive interest, because after all, under the Paris Agreement, all countries were taking on targets on climate neutrality around 2050, some a bit earlier, some a bit later, but the long-term target is climate neutrality. So all of them will have to dig much deeper in how to develop policies, and carbon pricing is going to be a very important one. Because in Europe we delivered one proof that is through the carbon market, you can reduce emissions without reducing economic output, economic activity. And I think that decoupling is very important. That means we are not harming our economic activity through climate action. We are strengthening it if we are succeeding in bringing new technologies to the market, renewable technology, storage of energy, electric vehicles, you name it, energy efficiency, insulation of houses, all things we have to do, and that are not undermining the quality of life of the citizen. I think that's very important.
And do you think there is a need for bridges between compliance and voluntary carbon markets?
Well, I would hope that these bridges are going to be developed. And I see them coming in many countries. I studied the case of Mexico and South Africa, where there is already a kind of hybrid form, where there is a carbon tax or an emissions trading system against which you can deliver or fulfill your obligations with some offsets. So that is already growing. In the EU, that's not yet the case. We still have that left over from the CDM. I would hope that we will overcome that. I would not exclude that, but that is not going to happen overnight. First, the voluntary carbon market, the offsets, will have to be of much more environmental integrity compared to what is now the case.
So now if we talked about the bridges between compliance markets and voluntary carbon markets, how about the bridges between the EU and other countries? In terms of the goals.
Well, we tried to link up emissions trading systems with one another. We linked up totally with Switzerland. Switzerland is not a member of the EU, but they are completely integrated. Of course, Norway, Iceland, Liechtenstein is also part of the EU ETFs. What about the UK? The UK left the EU. The UK has a system comparable to what the EU ETS was. I would have a hope that once the politics gets a bit more calm and quiet, that they may link up as well. There have been talks of linking up with other constituencies like California, like New Zealand, like Australia, but then Australia went off track, so their climate policy changed. So there is a willingness to link up our carbon market with other carbon markets. But I think that the majority of relations between Europe and the EU ETS is going to be through the voluntary carbon market. And that is a hopeful development that I hope we are going to go. But again, it depends on the quality of the credits. And that is a major point I wanted to pass over here in the discussions today. Yes, there is goodwill, but be mindful, quality will have to be delivered. No quality, I think Europe is not going to open up for more use of offsets in this space.
And now we're taking just one step back again from the carbon markets, from voluntary carbon markets or compliance markets, and thinking about the global situation that we are having right now. There are already studies published just a couple of weeks ago saying that we are some of the tipping points of climate disasters, if you even can say like that, are going from being possible to likely now being at 1.1%. Is there still a chance to stay at 1.5 and reach the Paris Agreement goals and targets?
Well, I'm asking myself sometimes the same question. I think what we agreed in the Paris Agreement was or should be revisited. And the Paris Agreement, we said, well below 2 degrees Celsius. And then a couple of years later, it was reformulated to 1.5 degrees Celsius. When I look at the figures, the 1.5 degrees Celsius is really, really challenging. So I think that what was agreed under the Paris Agreement, the well below 2 degrees Celsius, is a bit more realistic. Now, having said that, for Europe in particular, we will have to assess what the impact of the war in Ukraine means for our climate targets. Not that we have to change them, but how quickly we are going to reach them. And in the short term, it doesn't look good, because we are using again coal and lignite, and we are revisiting old installations. So in the short term, it's not looking good. But in the medium term, in my view, it looks much better, because individuals are looking for insulating their houses. They are looking for solar panels on their roofs. They are looking for perhaps more energy efficient and carbon efficient transport. So the high prices on energy, after a couple of years, will do their work. And I think that's not to be underestimated, how the citizen may rationally react to the very expensive energy prices that they are confronted with gas is expensive, electricity is expensive, so transport and other energy services are going to become more expensive. Having said that, that's all good and well for those who have the means to do it. Because insulating your house costs a lot of money. Yeah. So there is perhaps a quarter of our population that will have to be actively supported by the government because there is no margin in the budget, to do a fairly important renovation of the house and things like that. So we need also a social policy. So that's what I wanted to say. We need the rollout of low carbon innovation and investment. We have to invest in industry much more in low carbon innovation, and we have to support the social groups that are really suffering today from the high carbon prices. So the jury is out. In a couple of years, hopefully the war will be behind us. We will have more normal situations on the energy market. How good or how bad we will have done on that moment.
Perfect. Thank you very much for your time.
Welcome. Real pleasure.